What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Spike Week, presented by RotoGrinders.com. As always, I am your host, Erik Beimfohr. You can follow me on Twitter at Erik Beimfohr, formerly known in the ship-chasing chat as Erik Beimfohr. Erik Beimfohr. That's pretty funny. People really do have a lot of trouble with my last name. It's a difficult one. I've dealt with it my whole life. It's really been tough. But anyway, today I want to talk about something. So a lot of things that I kind of start to talk about on these. First of all, I really like to freestyle. You see notes here if you're watching on YouTube. Like, I kind of put this together just as talking points, but I really like to freestyle. I think it's a little bit better. But that also comes from the fact that I am and I think everybody should develop your kind of thoughts as you work through drafts. Like, I came into the draft season, like I started drafting in May, which some of you probably think is crazy. I am a sicko. But I started drafting in May, and like my thoughts and like the way I wanted to attack drafts was vastly different than it is now. And the only way to kind of, I talked about this on the last episode, the only way to really figure out the best way to attack drafts and the best way to kind of adapt to each draft, or, even the different sites. There's a lot of nuance to all this, right? ADPs are different on Underdog versus DraftKings. The scoring is different. The format is different. Just like how many players you're drafting, right? The competition level is different. It's different if you're drafting right now on Underdog, if you've drafted in Best Ball Mania 2 compared to what they just released, the Puppy. Those are different drafts. And so you just have to, in my opinion, work through some of this stuff to start to have, your beliefs and the things you think are the most advantageous to do in draft really start to kind of come to fruition in your mind. And something that has really come to fruition for me this year that I don't think I necessarily have always used, and I know for a fact I haven't always used, like especially looking at some of my early drafts, is just the power and the kind of what I believe to be the upside and the expected value of 2 quarterback, 2 tight end teams. So drafting only 2 quarterbacks, drafting only 2 tight end teams, and how powerful I think those drafts can be, and how having more of them in your portfolio, say, than the field, having a higher percentage of these 2 quarterback, 2 tight end teams than maybe you even feel comfortable with, I think is a really high value way to go about this draft season. And like the first thing is really just an upside case. If you guys have listened to me or followed me on Twitter or on RotoGrinders, generally that I play to a lot more upside scenarios. Like in my specific player selection, like even on teams maybe that other people wouldn't do it. Right. So last night I did a live stream of a draft on Twitter where I was just drafting in the Puppy. I was going to record this podcast actually last night. Underdog released the Puppy, their $5 contest, which if you haven't signed up for Underdog, make sure to use promo code Grinders for a free Best Ball Mania 2, free $25 on Underdog. If you're listening, you probably already signed up, probably already taken some of my money in some of these drafts. But anyway, did a draft last night in the Puppy that I drafted towards the back end of the first round. I decided to try to see, it was as usual, running back heavy draft early. And I started to see what a 0 running back team would look like. I think I took Stephon Diggs and DeAndre Hopkins or something like that. And the draft started to play out where zero run, like full blown zero running back, like way more zero running back, I think, even than like some zero running back people would be comfortable with, started to play out for me. Like running backs were just not, people were I talked about it a bunch now in the last 24 hours. The running back thirst in drafts is real. And last night in this draft that I was in was even more real. But part of what helped me, feel comfortable with some of these things is I'm always thinking about what the goal of my teams are. And it's to win $1 million, right? Or in the puppy to win 250, or whatever it is, $100,000, $50,000. I'm trying to win first in these. And so I always come back to playing to upside scenarios. So like I said, I drafted a team that I think had, it had, quite frankly, a very low floor. My running backs, like if you thought about it right now in week 1, they were real bad. It's a lot of backups, and I'm not going to be getting a lot of running back points. But I think I was drafting mostly around the idea of upside, and I do that probably more than the average person does, right? I take Tony Pollard and Latavius Murray and Darrell Henderson and my poster boy Darrington Evans, and some of these guys that other people take a little bit less because they want a little bit more of the floor plays, and I'm comfortable targeting the upside. And so this 2 QB, 2 tight end concept just like presents more upside than really any other build I think you can do. Like the core, the baseline of 2 QB and 2 tight end just presents you with so much more upside than like really any other build. And it just comes down to the fact of those positions are, we call 1Z positions. You only need 1 quarterback. You only need 1 tight end every week for the entire season. And so dedicating any more than 2 roster spots to that takes away, like, just from like a strict, like, I don't even want to say math perspective, but just logically, right? I have two quarterbacks to fill 1 position. If I'm right about those quarterbacks, the third one, who was going to in turn be the worst one, is like, I'm not using his points very often. And when I am using his points, it's gaining me very little because I have assumed that I hit on at least one of these 2 quarterbacks that I've drafted. And those quarterback points are so replaceable that that third guy, like, what good is that third guy doing me, right? A spike week from a 9th or 10th wide receiver and a spike week from a late round running back, or a spike season from a late round running back, provides me with so much more value because I can use that at multiple different positions, right? A running back can be used in 2 running back spots and a flex. A wide receiver spike can be used in 3 wide receiver spots or a flex. And there's not this floor of points at quarterback like I have with like, even your bad quarterbacks are scoring typically double-digit points every week. I went into some quarterback stuff a while back, just how when I talked about stacking without quarterbacks, but just how replaceable those quarterback points are. So what's the best way to leverage the fact that it's replaceable position and I can't gain that many points with a third one? It's to only take 2. Tight end, we know, like, is a incredibly weak position. You have a few superstars that separate themselves. It's obviously valuable to get those guys, but just the general concept of 2 tight ends, again, it's basically the same thing as quarterback, except a little, less replaceable points. But if I assume that I got tight end right, if I assume I got my 2 tight ends right, they're having good seasons, that third one is very rarely coming into my lineup. And even when he does, that third one is not providing me that many points that I wasn't getting before, if I was right about those 2 tight ends that I've already drafted. So that third one is just not gaining me very much. And so, people might argue, well, that late round running back or tight end isn't gaining you that much either. He has a lot of other players at that position on your team. That could be true. That could be true. But you have so many more spots to use that player at, right? And a late round tight end or quarterback just quite frankly doesn't have the ceiling that a late round, definitely not a late round running back, and from a spike, a usable spike perspective, doesn't really have the upside of a late round wide receiver, even as weak as the wide receiver core is right now, right? Deshaun Jackson is going in the 18th, 17th, or 18th round. Say whatever you want about what you think the Rams are going to do and what Deshaun Jackson's role is. We know a Deshaun spike is going to be a super powerful thing in your lineup. A Chris Herndon, who you're seeing on your screen right now if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe to RotoGrinders Daily Fantasy Sports YouTube page. A Chris Herndon spike, not as much. It's just the market is just more efficient on these positions because there's just only so many and you only need to use one. And so they have this upside. But when I was first kind of starting to talk about this concept at the beginning of draft season, like if you got Travis Kelce, it's just if you got Travis Kelce, if you got Dak Prescott, whatever, I was always just drafting the two at that position. That's like the consensus, right? That's the chalk answer. If you get an elite player at one of the onesie positions, you naturally only need to take two of them. And so I agreed with that. I've always kind of thought that. However, I think there's a lot more room to get uncomfortable at those positions. And here's what I mean by getting uncomfortable. You can be right a low percentage of the time with lesser priced players at these positions. But we still want to capitalize on when we are right. Take Chris Herndon, for example. Maybe not the best example, but I like to use him because I've drafted him way too much. We can even use somebody else because Chris Herndon may actually not be the best example. Trey Lance. I'm drafting Trey Lance a lot. I don't think anyone is really arguing that Trey Lance has a lot of upside. But let's say you miss out on these elite quarterbacks. I think it's somewhat understood that up through like Justin Herbert is this elite tier of quarterbacks. Some might take it a little bit further, but I think that's generally a tier where people feel good about these elite quarterbacks. But if you get Trey Lance, you get Justin Fields, you get Trevor Lawrence, you've drafted this person, like let's say, that's your QB1. The draft broke a certain way, and you have Trey Lance as your QB1. Drafting for fear of being wrong about Trey Lance, right? Whether it's him starting, oh man, I'm worried about Trey Lance starting week 1. Well, if you're worried about an extended stretch of not getting Trey Lance points, he might not be for you. Because you have to get a little bit uncomfortable with the fact that there's uncertainty around that guy and his, the ceiling is there, but I don't feel super comfortable with just him and one other guy on my team. But the benefits to having only two when you hit on that player are like huge, right? If you're right about Trey Lance, or let's use, even if Trey Lance and Justin Fields are the tougher examples because we don't know if they're going to start week 1 or how long it'll take for them to start. But Trevor Lawrence is starting to fall. If you're right about Trevor Lawrence, and he does catapult himself up closer to this top tier of quarterbacks, you're not going to want Ben Roethlisberger on your team with a late round pick. You're not going to want Sam Darnold or Carson Wentz or even like Matt Ryan or whatever as a third quarterback. Whoever you take as your second quarterback, I'm not shilling for one quarterback. I think that would be overkill. But if you're right about that guy, and let's say you take, I really like to take 2 rookies, but I think you can even push it. I think you can get uncomfortable, and I think we should embrace this uncomfortability of, especially at quarterback, taking 2. Now, there does get to be a certain point where, like, if you really, really punt quarterback, like really punt, right? Like you are drafting, and this has happened to me before. You're drafting Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones and Jameis Winston or whatever. I think taking that's kind of where it might be too much to take 2. But even then, I think there are reasons to be willing to accept this punt quarterback, and you take Carson Wentz and you take Sam Darnold, and you just say, these guys are going to get me close enough, and I'm going to win all the other positions because I spent the least capital on quarterback, and these guys are going to exceed expectations, and I'm going to get close enough. Right? They may not have the upside to match those guys. These rookies and these runners probably do, but I draft Carson Wentz and Sam Darnold, and they're going to exceed expectations. And I'm going to come close enough that the upside of just having those 2 and using the other resource on a spot that allows you to win every other position is huge. When you combine it now with tight end, this is, I think, where people get even, because they really feel uncomfortable, and they're really not willing to embrace that uncomfortability. Is tight end is really weak, and when you wait too long on tight end, you'll often hear taking an elite tight end allows you to only take 2. It's kind of the common way most think about it, and it's how I've thought about it for quite a while. It was definitely how I thought about it early in draft season. But I think we should embrace a little bit more low percentile outcomes. We should embrace the fact that pairing Anthony Firkser and Cole Kmet as my only 2 tight ends, more often than not, a high percentage of the time, I'm like probably losing points at tight end. But if I'm right, if they hit, taking Austin Hooper doesn't get you anywhere, right? Yes, a few weeks out of the season, Austin Hooper is going to get his 10 to 15 points, and you're going to use that score and pick up a couple of points. But if you're using Austin Hooper's score too much, the team is probably in trouble already, at least at tight end. And so, we just have to accept the fact that it's going to be wrong sometimes, right? You draft Anthony Firkser and you draft Cole Kmet, and it's like, yeah, maybe it doesn't work out. Maybe they do suck and you lose points at tight end. But in the scenarios where your 2 tight ends, even the ones that make you feel uncomfortable, in the scenario where they hit, right? You found Darren Waller. You found the new Darren Waller, right? For me, Mo Alley-Cox becomes Darren Waller. The tight end that we didn't, is a good player, and all of a sudden starts drawing all these targets, right? Delaney Walker says Anthony Firkser is a stud. Maybe he is. Maybe Derrick Henry goes down and the Titans become really they're passing 65% of the time, and Firkser is an elite tight end. No one's projecting that, and it's probably not going to happen. But if it does, I don't want to waste that spot on Austin Hooper in my team when I could use that Austin Hooper spot to now crush my opponents at another position, right? If Anthony Firkser, in the very low probability outcome that Anthony Firkser matches these elite tight ends, the value in that is huge. And so then I want to take that value and compound on it and capitalize on the variance that just occurred and swung in my favor, right? No one is projecting that. I like Cole Kmet. Maybe Cole Kmet becomes an elite tight end, right? Jimmy Graham goes out to pasture and Justin Fields is a baller. Maybe Justin Fields, here's a perfect example of a 2 QB, 2 tight end thing, and you can even correlate it, right? I take Justin Fields and I stack him with Cole Kmet. If they both hit their ceilings together, I don't want a third quarterback and a third tight end. Cole Kmet catapults himself way up to top tight ends, and Justin Fields catapults himself up towards the top of quarterbacks. Now I have a huge leg up on my competition because I spent very little draft capital on two of the highest scoring players at their position. Is that low probability? Yes, but we want to capitalize on those low probability outcomes and increase the payoff that we receive on those, right? We know in general, like the early round guys are going to be good. Not even talking about quarterback and tight end, but it's like I stacked up a bunch of good players, right? I got Zeke and I got DeAndre Hopkins and I got whatever, Justin Jefferson. I got all these good players. Stacking that on top of when I hit on the uncomfortable guys, the payoff can be massive. If Trey Lance goes nuts, he has the old Kyle Shanahan throwback season to Robert Griffin III. He's the QB1. And this Anthony Firkser example happens, right? Or this Cole Kmet example happens. I take Trey Lance, Justin Fields. They're both starting week 1. And Cole Kmet is an elite tight end. It's just low probability outcome, but I'm playing in a contest with 150 plus thousand people. I need a low probability outcome to hit. In that case, you drafted a competitor of the elite tight ends in the 16th round, and you drafted later round quarterbacks, taking the additional late round picks that you have and piling it onto the other positions that allow you to then capitalize on more variance at those positions and stockpile quantity at those positions and leave your onesie positions, quarterback and tight end, to the spots that you have just crushed. You've crushed with guys who have outproduced their ADP. Whoever you think that is. But it goes back to this drafting as if you're right thing. And the value in only having 2 at each of those positions, if you're right about them, is immense. It's huge, right? Because I can get more lottery tickets at the other positions. And I'm making a small parlay. That's all it really is a small parlay, right? If I take Trey Lance and Justin Fields, two-leg parlay, I hit on those guys. In turn, that means Cole Kmet hit and whatever, and then I have the Firkser thing. Okay, I have a small little mini parlay there. And now I just need that extra 1 or 2 lotto tickets at the end of a draft. And I probably don't, you don't need every pick in an 18-round draft to hit. But if I hit on a couple of these guys, and then I hit on that one, right? My guy, Darrington Evans. And he kind of correlates with Anthony Firkser. So maybe this is a good example. I got lucky and stumbled upon one. If you ramble enough about the same nonsensical players, you'll stumble on good examples. But these rookie quarterbacks smash, right? We see the upside. That event comes true. Justin Fields and Trey Lance smash. Justin Fields carries Cole Kmet, right? Their ceilings are correlated. So that correlated event hit. There's one event you needed. Trey Lance hits, which I'm going to argue that's a high probability event, but we'll see. Trey Lance hits, Justin Fields and Cole Kmet's, that event comes together. Then you need one more event. Derrick Henry goes down, right? Derrick Henry goes down. Now the Titans are pass heavier. Firkser, Darrington Evans correlated because they're going to Darrington Evans obviously steps into a bigger role without Derrick Henry. They're going to throw more. Firkser hits a ceiling. It's like 3 things happen for you. You need these parlays to hit to win $1 million. And so putting them together, now you just built an all-star squad, right? And all you needed was Justin Fields. I don't even know what the probability of him being good is. It might be really high because he seems pretty good to me. Cole Kmet was already earning work last year. What's the probability that he really becomes the guy there? He's the number 2 in that offense behind Allen Robinson. What's the probability of that? Seems possible to me. And then you get one lucky injury. So you're just creating this parlay, and it's all based in how you set up your team at these two positions. Because the other positions, like you drafted a bunch of good running backs and wide receivers. Just hope you have the right combination, but it's based around the power and the payoff potential of two QB, two tight end builds. And I just think, like I said, I've drafted more. Like I look back at some of my early teams with 3 quarterbacks or 3 tight ends, and I just think I didn't draft like I was right. And I'm not going to get a huge payoff here. And I think that's what we should be focused on. A lot of variance is going to happen, and we need to embrace it. We have to get uncomfortable. We're not going to be able to capitalize on it. We're not going to be able to find the huge payoff if we're not willing to get uncomfortable. And I think there's this natural idea that is just best ball is still so new. Everyone has said, oh, if you don't get, there's a tier break here. If you don't get that guy, you got to draft 3 at this position. And I just don't think that that's true, specific to these contests that we're talking about here, because it's not, that line of thinking is not thinking about payoffs. What happens when a couple events swing my way? What's the payoff? Versus what's the payoff to taking that Austin Hooper or that Ben Roethlisberger or whatever. So that's something I've been chewing on, and I wanted to talk about here today. If you see me in the draft streets, I'll probably be taking teams that you don't feel comfortable, and maybe I don't feel comfortable. But I think some of these types of things are really the keys to some of these big best ball contests. And it's also a way that we can get a little bit of leverage on the field, with the field pretty much only taking 2 quarterbacks when they get an elite guy, or they're taking 3, and the same for tight ends. I think it's another way that we can, pivot away, zig when other people are zagging, and maybe give ourselves a few more shots on goal at these big top prizes. We'll be back shortly. I'm recording this on a Wednesday. Tomorrow we're drafting. Thursday's draft day. Bringing on a special guest. Be announcing it a little bit later. Until then, we'll catch y'all later. We're out of here.